Hello, everybody. Welcome to Reclaim with Thaís Sky. I'm your host. I'm Thaís Sky. Welcome. I'm so thrilled that you're here. If you're watching on YouTube, hi. If you're listening to this podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, hi to you too. It's been a minute. It has been a minute. I think maybe a month, 3 weeks since I've recorded a new episode. And I think it's because I knew that this topic, I wanted to talk about this. I wanted this to be my next episode. I mentioned it in the previous episode with Meredith Redding. I hinted that I wanted this to be an episode. I knew I wanted to record it, and yet perfectionism got in my way. I really wanted this episode to be perfect. I think this information is something I've been holding and exploring within my own life in such deep ways. And I wanted to present it in a really beautiful and effective and spacious way. I don't know. I just wanted it to be perfect. And I look at my outline and I'm like, oh, there's so much I could add. Is there anything I'm forgetting? Like I just got kind of in my head of wanting it to be perfect. And so I just haven't recorded it. And then, as many of us who identify as perfectionists struggle with, is if we don't do the thing isn't out in the world. And then we're depriving ourselves of doing the thing. We're depriving people of hearing the thing if it's of use to them. There's a lot of deprivation that goes on with perfectionism. So I'm doing the thing. I'm recording the episode, and it may be imperfect, but it is going to be better done than perfect. And so here on this episode today, I want to talk about how to open up to more receiving. I want to talk about this idea of receiving. I want to explore different concepts around this idea of receiving, and some kind of ideas that maybe we don't know they're connected, but I hopefully will create a case for why they are, and can help us see receiving in a little bit of a different light, and maybe it will help us to find ways to bring more goodness into our lives, because that's essentially what we're talking about, right? When we're talking about receiving, we're talking about the ways in which we really struggle to let good things in. We struggle to let in compliments. When somebody compliments us, we kind of brush people off. When people say they love us, when they show that they care for us, it doesn't stick. It doesn't go inward, and we then feel like, this is a metaphor that I use often in my work, is like we're little raisins in the middle of the rainforest, right? So there's lots of rain everywhere. There's a lot of opportunity to get saturated with rain, to be regenerated by rain, to be supported, nourished by rain, and yet we're like little raisins, right? It's just not going in. It's not going inward. And like raisins, there's probably ways in which we have felt like our goodness was squeezed out of us. And like raisins, once you go from grape to raisin, it's impossible to go back to grape. I don't believe that in terms of the human psyche, but certainly that's true. I think I never tried to put water back in a raisin before, but I'm going to take a gander and say that it's quite hard to do. And that's often how it feels for us. It feels really hard to let the good thing in. And yet. So it's hard to let in the love. It's hard to let in the care in ways that may be all around us and we just aren't even seeing it, or it feels like we're in the desert. It feels like no one cares and loves for us. And when people do care and love for us, it feels hard to see. It feels hard to let in. And also we have this sense that, like if you're listening to this episode, you have a sense that there's something about learning how to receive. There's something about learning to let that goodness in that will actually feel really, really supportive. We have a sense that to let good things in is a part of what it means to feel nourished and supported. We have a sense that not letting things in isn't helping us, right? And I think that's true. I think if we struggle to let good things in, we're going to find a lack of good things inside. And it's important. It's important to open ourselves up to receiving, or else, I mean, we don't have to, but if we don't, I think we're really going to struggle with, with the case that I'm going to build here for you all today. I think we're going to struggle in our relationships. We're going to struggle with our self-worth and our self-confidence. We're going to really struggle with how to feel connected to ourselves in the world, because those things are intertwined. Okay. And okay, also one more thing about receiving that I think then happens when we have a hard time receiving is that then we try to justify that we don't actually need it. That's kind of the trick that we play on ourselves. We have a hard time receiving what we want, and it may be all around us, but we don't see it. And so what we do see is that there isn't an abundance all around us. There isn't good all around us. And so the ways in which we try to kind of alleviate some of the suffering of this struggle of wanting goodness and it not being around us is we say, then we don't need it. I don't need other people. I don't need to receive good things. I can figure it out on my own. I just need to work harder on myself. I don't actually need to open myself up to receiving and to love and to goodness around us. Like I can be self-sufficient in that. I can generate it within ourselves. And so this is part of the case that I'm building, because what we find is that if that is your belief system, if in some ways you've kind of believed that maybe you don't need to allow anything, to receive anything good, like you don't need compliments or you don't need that external validation, right? We say this to ourselves a lot. I need to work on not needing validation. I need to work on self-validating. I need to work on learning how to give to myself. This is all connected because that belief system is all intertwined. We struggle with this because, okay, let me back up. It feels like we struggle with this because let's go with validation, because this is a very popular way that we find ourselves grappling with. On the one hand, we often feel like we need validation. We want validation. We want to be told we're doing a good job. We want people to see us and to witness us. That's for many of us, that's true. On the one hand, we really want it. On the other hand, we often feel we don't get enough of it. We often really struggle with feeling like no one ever really sees us, no one really validates us. And then when we do get validation, it may feel good on one level, but on the other level, we then have a hard time believing it. We have a hard time admitting and letting it in, right? We say, oh, that can't be true. Oh, they don't really know. If they really knew, then they would know that I don't deserve this validation. And then there are ways in which then we try to close ourselves off from this whole system of deprivation and wanting what we're not getting and then getting and feeling like it's not valid, etc., by saying, I just need to self-validate. I just need to give to myself. If I could just be enough and sufficient in giving validation to myself and loving myself and not needing other people's validation, then this wouldn't hurt as much. Now, I've talked plenty on my podcast before about how that actually isn't how it works. We can't cut off other people from the ways in which we need things from people. Self-validation isn't the answer to no validation from the world or to disappointment of not getting validation from the world. Self-validation is an important aspect of growth and being able to nurture ourselves, parent ourselves, however way we want to put it, but it's not going to be a replacement. It's going to be an add-on, right? It's going to be a this and more. Okay. So let's say that you agree with this whole cycle. So first in the cycle, part of, I think, a really important aspect of the work of breaking this cycle is going to be to grapple with, to be able to give ourselves space to feel into the ways in which we don't get enough. The deprivation and the fact that we don't get enough now probably speaks to the ways in which we have a really big hole that feels like nothing that happens now fully addresses. And that big hole usually stems out of a childhood experience or experience in our lives where we didn't get enough of something. Usually when we're so desperate for something now, we're so thirsty for something now, and then we get it and it's never enough. Usually, not always, but usually that speaks to something deeper, a deprivation that goes into a past where we needed something and we didn't get. And so if we didn't get it then, it's going to be much harder to take it in now. And also whatever we take in now isn't going to fill the thing we didn't get then. Right? We can't go back in time. So if you didn't get something you really needed as a child, no amount of getting it now is going to make up for it. I mean, it's kind of like this. Let's think about it like this. If you didn't get a nutrient, let's say you didn't get a nutrient as a child. I don't know what that nutrient would be, but let's just say you didn't get a nutrient as a child. Now, your body, because you lacked that nutrient, let's say, may not have grown and developed in the way that it needed to because you needed that nutrient. I really wish I could put a nutrient to, let's just say iron. I don't know, calcium. You know what, whatever. So let's just say you didn't get a nutrient then. Your body didn't develop the way it needed to develop if it had gotten that nutrient. And now you're living in the world with a body that is just not developed in the way that it could have been. It doesn't matter now how much of that nutrient you get. It's not going to undo that lack of development in the body. You may now need in some ways more of that nutrient because your body, that may be true, but a development is a development. You're just not going to be able to compensate for something you didn't get when you were in utero or when you were a child, when you were 2, 3, 4. So while it's a little bit different psychologically speaking, in some ways that metaphor I think connects, where just if you didn't get enough of something then, you're going to create a constellation, a kind of personality structure, a way of relating to yourself in the world that is wrapped up around that deficiency. And so now you may really struggle with feeling like anything you ever get is ever enough. And so part of that journey of like tending to that, for some of us, is going to be first to mourn what you didn't get, right? To allow yourself to actually face and reconcile with the fact that you didn't get something really, really important. And in that reconciling, in that mourning, and in that experience and process, I think we do find ways of tending to that wound. And then now, as an adult, it's time to recalibrate our relationship with the deficit and what it means to get enough of it now. And that's, I think, where this podcast episode comes in. Like what can we do now to open ourselves up to more receiving and to letting things in? So not only to open up, but to then let in. Okay. To let in more goodness, to receive. I know that this conversation often is talked about in manifestation spaces. And as someone who was in one of those spaces and taught from that space and taught manifestation workshops, and truly believed in these concepts, one of the big concepts of manifestation is to truly believe that there's an abundance around you and that you are in perfectly capable, that there is an endless amount around you of bounty, of goodness, of wealth around you, and the journey, the work in manifestation is to let it in, is to receive. And so I've been grappling with it since then, because again, I teach and I share what I'm grappling with, and learning how to receive is something that I've grappled with for a very long time. And so those concepts at the time were helpful for me, but I kept getting stuck in the fact that I know intellectually what I need to do to feel more abundant and to receive. I know I've heard all of the gurus, right? I've read all of the books, I know all of the things, and yet it's just not getting in. It's just not getting in. And I remember my therapist at the time, she said something that continued to stick with me. She was like, you just have to practice letting in a teaspoon at a time. You don't have to oversaturate yourself and try to go wild and bringing goodness in. You can start with, can you let in just a teeny tiny bit at a time, a teaspoon at a time? And I really appreciated that, because to me it evokes an imagery of somebody who is very, very dehydrated. If they've gone a long time without water and they finally have a source of water, they actually have to drink that water very, very slowly, because if they drink it too quickly, the body actually can't digest it and it pushes it back out. They get sick, etc. And it feels like that. If we've been deprived of something for so long, then it's important for us to take our time and give ourselves little doses at a time, as opposed to trying to give ourselves so much and then get really overwhelmed, and then feel like we are failing in some way and get in touch with our shame and feel really bad, and then kind of give up. So if that's helpful for you, maybe that's helpful for you. Letting in a little bit at a time, finding good things that are going on around you and seeing if you can just take some deep breaths and letting it in just a teeny tiny bit at a time. But this episode goes a little bit further than that, because what I want to talk about is a correlated exploration that can help us in receiving, but may feel a little disconnected. And so here's my thesis. Let's go with my thesis first, and then we'll break it down. So I believe that to receive, to let in goodness, right? To let in that somebody loves us, to let in validation, to really accept the love, right, that is some around us, to really receive, it means to be open to taking something in. We got to be interested in taking something in, which means that we have to know that there is something that we don't have ourselves, right? That there's something that we don't have in ourselves. And so we're now open to bringing it inward. And that means that we have to admit that we have certain needs. To need is to admit that we don't have, because if we have it, we don't need it. Right? So if we to be open to receiving means to know that there's something that we don't have that we want, right? That we need. And it means to need something from somebody else. And that means that we have to open ourselves up to depending on other people. If we have needs, it means we have to depend on other people to meet those needs. And that's a big thing I just proposed, because if we're talking about receiving means to admit that we have dependency, that we have to depend, then that makes sense that for those of us who want to be self-sufficient, who want to be independent, who don't want to depend on people, we are going to find that it is those people that will particularly struggle with receiving, because what a self-sufficient archetype or structure, what we're attempting to do in that self-sufficiency is to not open ourselves up to other people, because other people have not been dependable, have not been reliable, have not been able to give us what we needed. And so we're hoping that if we close ourselves off to other people and give to ourselves what we have found that people don't give us, then we will be okay. And so it's a closed system. It's like the doors are closed. We're trying to fulfill everything inside of us, which means inherently in that structure, we can't actually need other people. We can't have needs, because to have needs means to admit that we don't have something and that we can't generate something within ourselves. To have needs means that we have to be open up to other people, to receive from other people, to depend and rely on other people to give this thing to us. That's my theory. That's my thesis. I'm sure that there are plenty of arguments to be made that this is not, that there's other ways of looking at it, et cetera, but this is my podcast. So let's just go with my thesis for a second and see if it has any merit, and then you can decide yourself if this is something that feels useful for you to embody and to carry in or not. Okay, so to have needs, right? To have needs means that there's something within ourselves that we can't generate. The need for respect, for example. We can't generate that within ourselves. We can respect ourselves, but that doesn't fulfill the need, which is to feel like the world respects us, that we have, a way of being in the world that people value and respect. That means that we are depending on the world to generate something for us. And first off, we're social creatures. We need each other. I mean, that's just a basic human fact. We're not self-sufficient. We can't be self-sufficient. Self-sufficiency is a lie. And in many ways, it's a lie driven by a hyper-individualistic culture that tries to put the onus of our happiness on the shoulders of ourselves, because if we don't need each other, if we don't depend on each other, then we don't actually have to think about each other. We can be greedy, we can be power hungry, we can annihilate our planet. We don't actually need to think about its survival because we don't need each other. So a hyper-individualistic culture, a culture that perpetuates this idea that you don't need each other, that you can, just be so productive and just focus on yourself, is failing the human race. I mean, it's failing our Earth in so many ways. We do need each other. It doesn't matter what culture says. Like, it doesn't erase the biological and social fact that we do need each other, that our brains are wired for each other. So much so that developmental psychology says that we actually can't know ourselves without the other. And that's a terrifying thought for those of us who really struggle with wanting to be self-sufficient and super independent and not need people, because that means that what we're doing then in that hyper-individualistic, self-sufficient state is we're cutting our parts of ourselves off. It's not succeeding in not needing people. We're not actually succeeding in that, but what we are certainly succeeding in is cutting ourselves off from our own needs and from then the ability to receive in goodness. I don't think that we talk enough about how self-sufficiency is literally the thing that gets in the way of getting our needs met. Because if we are self-sufficient, then we're trying to cut ourselves off from others. But how do we get our needs met? By other people, right? Like, we get our needs met by other people tending to our needs. That's how that works. So we have certain needs, let's say the need for food and water and shelter. And in certain ways, we can meet our own needs. We go home, we make dinner, but who's bringing that food to the table? We're going shopping, sure, but then who's putting the produce in the grocery stores? Like, there's just no such thing as needing each other. But what we try to do is we try to cut off ourselves from needing, because if we could cut ourselves off from needing, what we're attempting to do is cutting ourselves off from the disappointment of not getting the needs that we needed met. We're trying to cut ourselves off from the terror and the trauma and the devastation and the impact, whichever one affects you, right? The impact of the fact that we needed something and we didn't get it. And that can be so terrible. And what developmental psychology tells us is when it comes to attachment, when it comes to this kind of core idea of depending on people, attaching ourselves to people, relying ourselves to people, we are going to choose that. That's required for survival. Attaching as a child, as an infant, attachment is required for survival. And so we will do whatever it takes internally in order to maintain that attachment, which means for most of us, what we'll tend to do is we'll cut off parts of ourselves rather than impact that attachment. So if, for example, we're attaching to caregivers who are abusive to us, rather than, and I'm talking about very, very early, rather than seeing the abuse as bad, we have no context to knowing that abuse is bad, but we have a sense that we don't like it. So what we tend to do is we tend to try to cut ourselves out. We try to cut those feelings out so that we can make the abuse digestible, so we can maintain the attachment to these abusive caregivers because we need the attachment. It is really unfortunate that so much of our healing as adults is undoing things that we had no control over as a child. I mean, it's really, really unfair. The things that happened to so many of us is really deeply unfair and unjust, and it may continue to feel unfair and unjust that we now have to continue to grapple with it. But it is also an opportunity to learn more about ourselves and to expand our ways of relating to ourselves, etc. But okay, so to have needs, okay, is to depend. And the word depend is really, really scary because, again, in our culture, we're so scared that dependency means codependency, and that codependency means that we are somehow failing. And almost always codependency is looked at as a female trait. And I've recorded episodes on codependency. I'll link it in the show notes for you, and my thoughts on dependency and codependency, because I have lots of thoughts about it. So I'll link it. I won't repeat it here. I'll link it in the show notes if you're interested in listening to that. But it does mean that if we want to be open to receiving, we must get in touch with the fact that there is something we don't have within ourselves. It's just a part of the process of needs. It's why so many of us struggle with even knowing what we need. When we're struggling with even knowing what we need from another, what we're doing is we're struggling with the fact that we haven't really allowed ourselves to be in touch with the fact that we have needs. We've become so accustomed to trying to meet ourselves, trying to give ourselves, trying to cut ourselves off from other people, that now we really struggle with, how do I even let people in? And the conversation about needs is a beautiful opportunity and exploration of how do we let people in. Okay, so tangential to this, or like parallel to this, or connected to this, is when we're talking about needs, we're talking about things that we want from the world, that we want to learn to receive, right? We want to learn to receive more money. We want to learn how to receive more compliments. We want to learn how to receive better opportunities. We want to learn how to receive these things. We want to take something in. In order to take that in order to receive, we have to admit that there's something that we want. There's something that we need from the world, right? That's my whole theory. Okay, so a part of that desire, a part of what can be so scary about letting ourselves need or want to be in touch with longing, to be in touch with desire, is that a part of this is being in touch with loss. This is very Lacanian, this idea that desire is connected to our life force, that to desire, to want, is a part of what it means to be alive, to go forward, to be creative, to have purpose, to have meaning. All these things require being in touch with a desire to like a hunger, like a desire for more, to digest, to explore, to experience. This life force of desire is an important aspect of what it means to be human. And in order to desire, in order to want, we have to be in touch with the fact that we don't have, and that we may never have had. And that elicits feelings of loss, of mourning, of grief, of sadness, of disappointment, of frustration, of despair, of hopelessness. All of these difficult feelings often are driven unconscious. We're not even aware that to want means to be in touch with the loss. And this is why I think it can be so hard for us to receive when we're seeing, like when we're really wanting to be seen. I remember having this experience in grad school where we did this exercise with our colleagues where we practice like really listening. It was like, of course, this is grad school to become a psychotherapist, right? So we did this exercise where we were like staring each other in our eyes and doing this whole thing. And my colleague and I, who were, we were also friends, and they looked into my eyes and they were really paying attention to my story. And I felt so seen. I felt so seen. And it immediately threatened something within me. It felt so uncomfortable. I wanted nothing to do with it. Like, stop fucking looking at me and listening and paying attention, which is wild because that's the exact thing that I want, right? And that I say that I want so much. Looking back at that experience, part of what's so difficult about being seen is getting in touch with the fact that there's something about this experience that feels so good, and it feels so good because I didn't get enough of. There is a loss of what I didn't get, a loss of, I should have gotten this and didn't. There is a sadness that comes with getting what we want, because then we are also put in touch with what we didn't get. I'm talking, of course, about like relational things, having someone really get our jokes, or having this feeling of like home with a person, and then getting in touch with the fact that like, I didn't feel this way growing up. I never really felt this way. It always felt like something was off, something was wrong. I never really felt understood. And like, that's where one would hope that they would feel the most understood, is at home with these people that raised me, that birthed me. And so to be in touch with how delicious it is to now feel like there's a sense of home with this person means also being in touch with what like I didn't really get. And that can be really, really painful. It can be really painful for us to be in touch with loss. And so that loss, that despair of not having gotten often goes unconscious, but that it impacts our sense of desire, and it impacts how much we desire from the world and want from the world. We cannot cut off parts of ourselves without cutting off so many other internal experiences. And so if we're cutting off loss and despair and disappointment, we're also cutting off the goodness and the ability to receive the goodness. So much of desire and that voracity, that hunger for the world, is tied to loss. And in order to get what we want, to admit that we have wants from each other, from other people, to have needs, to ask for needs, to receive all of that, we have to acknowledge what we do not have, what we did not have. We have to acknowledge that there are ways in which we attach to people who harmed us or who neglected us in ways that deprived us of an experience that we should have had. My kind of basic argument here is that to receive is an interpersonal experience. To receive is not just solely an internal state of reading manifestation books and believing that there's something good about you, but it's actually deeply tied to a relational experience. That so much actually of the self-help and self-improvement is actually what we're struggling for and wanting as relationships. But anyway, but especially when it comes to receiving. If you're really struggling to receive, if you're struggling to read these manifestation books and self-help books that tells you that you're worthy and you should just believe that you're worthy and go after good things, and then you try that and you get the good thing and it doesn't go inward, it's probably because what we're talking about is a deeper issue around dependency, needs, relationships, disappointment, and the ways in which we have morphed so much of our internal landscape to try to prevent feelings because we're really scared that these feelings at one point in time was going to destroy us and may have broken us psychically in some way. So we've protected ourselves. And now, as an adult, what we're looking for, what we're seeking is not more ideas. It's not advice. It's not to be told what to do as much as we think that that's what it is. Like if I could just read the right book, if I could just get the right information, right? We're actually, I think what we're really seeking, what we're really wanting is to expand our capacity to tolerate and be with some more of these difficult, in many ways kind of driven underground internal experiences. And that when we expand our ability to be with ourselves, often through relationships that help us, what we tend to then experience is more of ourselves. More of ourselves comes out of more meaningful relationships. And it just is this beautiful inverse dynamic at play. So it's funny, right? And kind of counterintuitive that so much of desire is actually what we're really speaking to is loss. So much of to want means to not have. There's almost like a yin-yang quality to it. That so much of the striving and the connectedness is being in touch with our own deficiency and what we cannot generate ourselves. And that can elicit a lot of shame. And this connects so beautifully to the conversation I did have with Meredith Redding on narcissism and how we all have narcissistic traits and how narcissism is actually like an important aspect of human development. But then there are ways in which it can also crustify in a way, like fortify a defense structure to keep us away from shame. And so much of what the struggle of narcissism, we all have aspects of narcissism. And when I find my own little narcissistic pockets, like my own narcissistic wounds, what I tend to find there is that I actually cannot tolerate a lot of feedback. I can't tolerate a lot of people giving me opinions and advice and ideas. I can't tolerate a lot of people bringing anything inward because it's so shameful and so difficult to touch. It's like a really big gaping wound, and it requires a defensive structure of kind of like impenetrability. Obviously, if we're trying to be impenetrable, if we're trying to build up strong defenses, we're defending against letting things in. We're fortifying a way of keeping things out. And then we try to generate something internally, but we just can't do that. Because in order to generate something internally, we have to be a little bit more porous. But you may find yourself on the opposite side of the spectrum where you're very porous and everything feels like very penetrative, and it constantly feels like you're grappling between like so many of these feel states, and it feels like everything's getting in. And I'm bringing Meredith back on a podcast, and we're going to talk about another very pop psych concept that I think we've lost sight of its kind of core meaning and how it can be actually really useful. And now it's become this stigmatizing label, and it can feel very troubling. But I'm talking about the borderline personality diagnosis. So I'm going to talk more about Meredith with on that topic, but part of what I'm sharing here is, or you may find yourself being very porous and having so many emotions and just feeling like everything is impacting you so deeply. And so in those cases, there's something about the receiving, the taking in, there's actually in some ways going through, it's not sticking. And that's where there needs to be enough of like a fortification, enough of a like the structure that allows the good to come in and to stick, right? That quality of feeling and being in touch with loss, but also kind of being able to hold ourselves in that experience. All of this can be talked about and worked through in healing spaces with professionals, practitioners who have expertise in this. So if you're struggling with all this, that may be useful for you. But I think the core of my message here is, if you're struggling with receiving, just know that you're not alone. It's not something we can generate internally all by ourselves. In order to receive good things in the world, we have to be in touch with the what we didn't get. This is good news, right? Kind of these ideas can give us a little bit more of a way of working through some of these deeper internal struggles, and hopefully a way to feel a little less defective and like there's something wrong and broken with you if you're reading these self-help things and it's just not working. Okay, so I think I'm going to wrap it up here. I did it. I recorded this episode. I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, review, all of that stuff that every content creator encourages people to do. It does make a difference for the algorithm. The more reviews I get, of course, the easier the podcast is to be searched. And I really appreciate every single like, share, subscribe, review that I get. I read them. I appreciate them. I love it endlessly. I am talking to myself in my office. And so hearing from all of you gives me life force. And hey, if we're talking about dependency, right, this is how I depend on other people. And a lot of creation is a play on dependency. Depending on other people to like the art is an important, for many creators, can be a really difficult aspect of the work. Okay, so I will catch you all on the next episode.